Formula 1 will undergo fundamental change with almost immediate effect, thanks to a raft of radical new rules that have been approved for this season, 2021 and beyond. The fundamental aspects that define F1's competitive order will be shaken up dramatically over the next 18 months by a package put together to transform how the championship works in the wake of the current global challenges. That means by the time F1's new car rules finally get introduced in 2022 and herald a new era of closer racing, F1's DNA will be profoundly different already. Make sure you let us know what you think of this video in the comments below, subscribe to the channel and click the notifications button to keep up to date with breaking news like this in the future. But without further delay, here are the 5 things you need to know about F1's radical new changes. Performance balancing is a controversial subject in motorsport and it's something Formula 1 has always been keen to avoid. However, that will change from 2021 when a new aerodynamic development handicap system comes into play. Aerodynamic development in F1 is already restricted. Teams have a limited number of wind tunnel runs and hours they are allowed to log, and the same goes for CFD work as well. These are managed by blocks of time called aerodynamic testing periods or ATPs. As a rule of thumb, the ATP lasts 8 weeks. Currently, teams are restricted to 65 runs in the wind tunnel every week. For 2021, this was already being reduced to no more than 40 runs per week, while the number of CFD items that can be generated in an ATP will be capped at 2,000. And here's where the handicap comes in. The team finishing last in the championship will be allowed 112.5% of those limits, dropping in 2.5% increments for each position to give the first place team 90%. That's all a bit complicated, but this graphic should make it easier to understand. Let's say the 2019 championship repeats itself in 2020. That means the wind tunnel and CFD restrictions for 2021 will look like this. Mercedes, as the first place team, would get the lowest amount of aerodynamic freedom, with a maximum of 36 wind tunnel runs per week, and each team effectively getting an extra run, right up to Williams on 45. As the CFD item numbers are much greater, you can see this spread in action. 1,800 items for Mercedes, 2,250 for Williams. But the handicap will be increased from 2022 through to 2025, as this is a long-term project for the FIA. From 2022, it will be done in 5% increments. The team finishing last will get 115% of the allowance, dropping to just 70% for the winning constructor. So if those championship positions were achieved in 2021, it would yield this result for 2022. The maximum enjoyed by Williams as the last place team in this example barely changes, but the really significant consequences can be seen in the spread of the order and the impact on the most successful teams. In this example, Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull would get less than half the number of weekly wind tunnel runs than they enjoy at the moment. As for CFD work, the spread is also significant. The first place team drops to 1,400 items, while the last place team gets 2,300. The system will reset each year on June 30th. That means the team that finishes last in the Constructors' Championship in 2020 will get the maximum development allowance for the first half of 2021, but its allowance for the rest of 2021 will depend on where it is in the Constructors' Championship as of June the 30th. This is to keep the system as relevant to the real order as possible. An engine freeze is returning to Formula 1. Effective immediately, the 4 manufacturers will only be able to supply a certain number of specifications of power unit elements over a season. Manufacturers generally only aim for 2 upgrades a year anyway, although Honda has gone beyond this in the last 2 seasons in a bid to catch up with Mercedes and Ferrari. This year, no changes will be allowed for major combustion engine components, the turbocharger, MGUH or fuel and engine oil. One change will be permitted for the MGUK, control electronics and energy store. The manufacturers will then be allowed to make one change to all of these components between the end of the 2020 season and the end of 2021, and the same again goes for 2022 and 2023. But from 2024, 2 years before the next engine formula is introduced, no changes will be permitted at all. This means what an engine manufacturer starts the season with, it must finish with as well. Exceptions may be made for the sole purposes of reliability, safety, cost saving, car installation and supply issues, and it remains to be seen whether any manufacturer will be tempted to slip through a performance upgrade under the pretense of something else. But in short, the V6 turbo hybrid era is finally going the way of the V8s that came before them. F1 rulemakers have been keen for a while to introduce more standardization, but some teams have opposed this on the grounds of reliability risks and the potential for extra spending during development to ensure they are of sufficient quality. The problem has been tackled by the adoption of an open source system. It requires teams to publish their designs for certain parts, dubbed open source components or OSCs. Drive shafts, pedals and steering columns are among those designated as OSCs. This should reduce costs across the board, because once the open source pool is big enough, the small teams can dip in and save themselves development spending, while for the bigger teams, committing major money to develop these areas will be futile because other teams can just buy them themselves. Teams have to declare to the FIA which version of each OSC they're going to use, and if they supply the OSC to a rival team, it has to be of the same specification. It will require patience to have a big impact, as initially teams will need to develop their own components. They won't have time to wait for someone else's plans to be made public, as an OSC only needs to be uploaded before the first time it is used in a test or a race weekend. But once this database has got a bit bigger, the idea is it will lead to a form of standardization that's a bit more agreeable to everyone involved. The purpose of a new token system for 2020 is to manage the carryover of 2020 designs into 2021. Now, in case you weren't aware, to keep costs down and facilitate the postponement of new car rules until 2022, teams will need to use this year's cars again next season. Development has not been banned outright, but there are tight restrictions in place. The FIA has put together a list of what it's calling homologated parts. These are split into two groups based on when the homologation needs to be frozen. Some will need to be set by the first round of the 2020 season, and others not until round 8. Once the homologation is frozen, those components can only be updated between that date and the end of the 2021 season by using 2 tokens. But here's the thing, some homologated components have been afforded a value of 1 token, which means they can be updated twice in this period. Bigger components, such as inboard front and rear suspension, have been assigned a value of 2 tokens. That means teams can only deploy 1 change in specification once that design is homologated. It massively reduces what teams can change on their 2020 cars for next season. So if you've got a good car this year, you're likely to have an advantage in 2021 as well, and if you're playing catch up in this season, making up ground next year is going to be difficult. As expected, the reduction in the 2021 cost cap has been approved. The originally planned $175 million will reduce to $145 million for 2021, and then reduce to $140 million in 2022, and again to $135 million in 2023. That means teams like Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes must cut back or redeploy staff, a task that was already challenging before but will now be even more painful now almost 20% has been hacked off the budget they thought they'd be working to. The likes of McLaren, Renault and Racing Point reckon this is a major opportunity to launch themselves into the lead group. Andrew Green, technical director of Racing Point that will become Aston Martin in 2021, reckons the budget cap shifts the balance away from the current big three and suits those teams that have been working with smaller budgets already. He said those teams are now dinosaurs. You've got to be small, lean, efficient, and that's our strength. There are still exemptions to the budget cap, such as driver salaries, marketing costs and the 3 highest earners within a team, and engine development is also not covered. The hope is that massively restricting what teams are able to spend, as well as more tightly defining what they're allowed to spend their money on, and restricting some of the development available to the biggest teams, is going to make a huge impact on F1's competitive order. So big changes are coming for Formula 1, and some sooner than others, but do you think they're the right moves, and is there anything else you'd like to see introduced? Let us know what you reckon in the comments below, and remember to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and join us again next time.